So I know it's lunchtime soon, so I estimate that we're going to be eating in about 45 to 50 minutes, hopefully. By a show of hands, who here is an engineer or developer? Awesome. Now keep your hands up if you've had a painful experience with estimations. Love it. Okay. Well, hopefully that you will take something away today that will make your lives a little bit easier. Today, we're going to take a look at the Monte Carlo simulation and see how it can help us improve a typical estimation. The talk today is going to be like watching a movie and fast forward, so find something to hold on to. We're going to see 20 hours of material in about 20 minutes. So meet Mike, the manager, and Ellen, the engineer. It's Thursday, and Mike's got this great idea to build an app on how to donate excess food to feed the hungry. And he wants to know, of course, how long the MVP is going to take. Ellen sits there for a few minutes, and she's like, I think I can have it done by Wednesday, 3 weeks from now, to account for those ad hoc meetings and work and stuff. But freeze. Ellen just committed to a date, which is a single value. Well, you're probably thinking, well, what's the problem? It's a single value. Well, first off, we've made it easier for that estimate to be turned into a commitment or a promise. 2, we're actually taking a much larger risk because mathematically, there's an extremely small confidence associated to a single value. And 3, we usually base our estimates on too little information, like no specification. Honestly, I think we can agree that producing estimates feels like this a lot more often than we'd like. But the good news is it's actually normal to feel like that. Developing software is uncertain by default. There's no template or manual to tell us how to do things. We can build a feature or product in hundreds of ways. And that's because software development is innately problem-solving. In order for software to be commercially viable, though, businesses seek certainty and predictability. And so we estimate. But you think with all the estimating that we do by now that we'd be good at it? But research studies still show that we're still late or fail with our current estimation methods. Here, we can see the facts of uncertainty have not changed in 37 years. Our point is that our expectations don't match reality. For example, an executive says, actually, I want that project out by December. But we can see here on the left that at the feasibility phase, our estimates are actually going to vary by plus or minus 400%. So, how do we do this estimation thing better? Let's first orient ourselves with the estimation landscape, as I'd like to call it. There's all sorts of questions that are asked throughout the software development lifecycle, and they require some form of estimation. Big surprise. So each estimate has a different purpose, and as a result, it has a different context, constraint, and credibility of information required when picking the technique that we need to use to do the estimation. I personally like to think about it as a landscape of survival on an island. You might be thinking about Survivor. From the ocean approaching the island, it looks like paradise. But from deep within the island, it holds many unknowns. Likewise with software development. From the outside, we'll all admit the tech space looks quite glamorous. But on the inside, software is actually about survival. Will I generate enough revenue before we run out of money? And are we going to deliver enough value before our sponsors decide to pull out? So, as we can see, some questions have a higher risk associated to them than others. But the fact is, we still rely on estimates to make decisions. The aisle of estimations is quite huge. So today, I'm just going to give you a flavor of the yellow part, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. It's also important for us to understand our role in the estimation process so that we can effectively carry out our responsibility. On the left, we have the provider who is responsible for producing an honest, accurate, and credible estimate. And on the right, we have that decider who is responsible for assessing the risk with facts, making decisions, and driving the initiatives. So what's all the fuss with this estimations? The problem we face looks a little something like this. Businesses want predictability and certainty because there's constantly decisions to be made. But as I just mentioned, developing software is highly uncertain. This makes producing estimates, reliable estimates in particular, quite hard. Because they are hard, there's this ongoing cloud of confusion. This breeds distrust and the perception that estimates are useless. You might be familiar with the no estimations movement. We also have different amount of information available throughout the software development lifecycle. The highest amount of uncertainty is on the outside, as indicated by the yellow, and correlates with the highest variation in that cone of uncertainty we saw earlier. But yet, we seem to use one technique for all estimations regardless, and we make a whole lot of assumptions along the way. So we as people crave that certainty, but we can't afford it as shown by that cone of uncertainty. The ultimate estimation, one might say, is let's just do the project. But that's not feasible. So what can we do? Let's take a look. But first, what is the Monte Carlo simulation? Who here has heard of it before? Oh, awesome. I'm going to get challenged later. So, for those who aren't as familiar, it's a powerful technique that allows you to perform risk analysis on forecasting future outcomes. We then build a model of possible results and present them as a range of values as a probability distribution. This approach is very useful when there is a decision that needs to be made that involves lots of uncertainty. And as you can see, there's already a large amount of applications. Let's take one in the middle, search and rescue, which I found quite interesting. And they calculate the probable locations of missing objects, for example, vessels, and perhaps maybe that's how they found the Titanic. Here, we can see there's a common theme in all these different categories, is that the Monte Carlo is being used to increase predictability and hence improve the way we make decisions. So, let's get on to it. I thought we'd jump right in and use a typical example. In this case, we've got a fintech company who is building a secure wallet for cryptocurrencies. Recently, they decided that they wanted to allow their customers to make purchases from qualified Amazon sellers. Note, this is just an example. And of course, they asked, how long is it going to take to deliver it? Referring back to our aisle of estimation, the area highlighted in yellow is the context which we are going to be applying this Monte Carlo for. Along the way, I'm going to touch on where our current techniques fall a little bit short. So there's two simple steps to applying this Monte Carlo. One, we collect expert opinions as a range from developers. And this is actually nothing really that much different to what we do today, except for the added benefit of avoiding anchoring, a type of bias, eliminating unconscious translations from abstract points such as small, medium, large to timeframes. And it's actually a bit quicker because we're reducing, keyword, not removing, the debates and discussions. Traditional relative estimation methods are prone to easily getting out of control if there's disagreement. But I wonder, is that agreement really that important at the estimation stage? Tasks haven't even been assigned to developers yet. And in fact, people actually have different perspectives, experiences, and knowledge which are valuable and shape their estimate. So now that we've collected the inputs from our experts, we perform a simulation as if we collected those expert opinions 10,000 times, except we're going to use a machine to help us. In this case, I chose 10,000 sessions so that it would reflect and account for the randomness and uncertainty that arises in software development. And upon completing the simulation, we can see a range here of the likely number of days a project will take in efforts, as you can see by the distribution there. But before we continue, I'd like to briefly touch on the components of an estimate, which is quite important and I think easily gets brushed over. On the left, we have imaginables, the things we actually know about and have experienced. But on the right, we have the unimaginables, the things that we add as a buffer, the just in case. And the problem, though, with adding that is that we end up blowing our estimates out of proportion, therefore actually leaving those estimates nothing more than just a guess. And so, the Monte Carlo already helps us to distinguish the difference between the imaginables and the unimaginables. So let's take a closer look at the resulting distribution, in particular the beta distribution. It has two parameters, the alpha and beta, which we can use to deal with the shortcomings of the unimaginables. On the left here, we can see that alpha represents the accuracy. And we can see that the blue distribution, which is the one-off human estimates, has twice as many likely outcomes as the Monte Carlo. Research study shows that people aren't really good at making estimates, and we fall into two categories. And we're underconfident or overconfident, which means that our estimates are going to be underestimated or overestimated. And so, on the right here, the beta represents the bias or the unimaginables. And as you can see as a quick comparison, the right here represents the overconfidence, and the left blue distribution represents the underconfidence. Hence, we've actually been able to now quantify the components of an estimate. Admittingly, that was a little quick, right? You're probably wondering, what else can we learn from this distribution? It's just a curve. So let's take a quick look at a few more things. Likely outcomes. Traditional estimation techniques, such as t-shirt sizes or planning poker, they encourage us to communicate an absolute or relative effort estimate, for example, some number, size, or range, but they don't actually give us a corresponding probability. This means that we do not know how likely those outcomes are to occur. But with the Monte Carlo, we can say things like, I have a 95% confidence that it's going to happen, that I will deliver this project in 27 to 32 days. We also have increased accuracy. By default, it's already more accurate because the Monte Carlo factors in the randomness and uncertainty. Things like the t-shirt size estimation doesn't factor that in, and it actually focuses on complexity. More specifically, we can see that there's a higher density of outcomes over a narrower range with the red curves on the left, and that we can now quantify the confidence, which we've touched on. The laws of statistics actually shape what is realistic about the chances of completing the project are in the likely time frame. And the probabilities help us to communicate an honest estimate that is less ambiguous to stakeholders and our team. Lastly, the distribution provides information that is more credible because it enables us to quantify the extreme cases. For example, what is the chance that the project will go beyond the estimated time frame? We're always late. And other than stating that there's some chance to be sooner or later, we cannot quantify that with our traditional estimation methods today. So as we can see, we've actually producing estimates in software as a form of risk analysis. And in our simulation earlier, one of the beauties is we just simulated 10,000 estimation sessions within seconds. Imagine what it'd be like to actually do 10,000 planning poker estimation sessions. So far, we've been talking about effort, but the reality of why we estimate requires us to present the estimation as a duration, not effort. So as we can see here, we take the idea of duration. To get the idea of duration, we simply apply the Monte Carlo using our estimate of days of effort and account from our experience that our estimates are going to be off by 29 to 200%. This is called the expenditure ratio. And unfortunately, the details of the how, what, and why of this, we don't have time for today. So we fast forward and we apply that, and you can see that the distribution is actually quite different. So the duration is actually quite different to effort. So let's move on to talking about estimates just quickly, because this is actually just as important as producing them. When it comes to talking about estimates and communicating them, the communication part seems really easy. But in fact, communicating effectively and reliably is not. And the poor communication is the easiest way for us to undo all that hard work of producing an honest, accurate, and credible estimate. So we need to ensure two key things. One, uniform perceptions. By default, the Monte Carlo helps us to do this because it minimizes the layers of interpretations compared to our traditional estimation techniques. Applying the Monte Carlo empowers us with more precise data, specifically those probabilities. And with these probabilities, there is less room for ambiguity or subjectivity. But we should be aware that they can also be miscommunicated. So on the right here, we can see that there's multiple phrases that represent 20 to 30%. And because of this, I'd also like to propose that we use straight to the probabilities to avoid any additional interpretation. But there are always exceptions to every rule, So once in a while, let's make sure that if you are going to use phrases, that there's a shared understanding like the simple legend here. Secondly, we need to communicate those assumptions. Earlier I mentioned we make a lot of assumptions when doing estimates, and making assumptions aren't necessarily a bad thing, but we need to make sure we communicate them effectively so that everybody is on the same page, since they do influence our estimates after all. All right, so recall that there's all kinds of questions being asked through the software development lifecycle. This means that there's going to be a different purpose because they're a different form of estimations. It's important that we recognize this so that we can choose the appropriate estimation technique. Going back to our aisle of estimation, spending time at the beach versus hiking through a rainforest requires different equipment. The same goes for estimation. And estimating a project's budget versus the duration requires different techniques. Hence, they have different purposes. So as you may already be aware, the world doesn't stand still for perfect information. We've got to go with what we got, and we can always come back to fix it. The worst thing we can do, though, is make it up. So creating the right data for making decisions is a powerful advantage, especially if there's a commercial viability. Today, we saw how the Monte Carlo simulation empowers us to produce reliable data for how long a project could take. In addition to that, we can see here that the Monte Carlo is actually cheaper in addition to being quicker. So we're going to feel the pressure like this scene in the first Mission Impossible, but that's the nature of business and software. But it doesn't always have to feel this way if we're prepared. You know what they say about happiness? It can't be bought. But we can be a little happier while we do estimates. I hope you all agree. So in particular, we can do happy estimations. Honesty, not lies. We have a responsibility to provide honest information which will be used for decisions. Awareness over ignorance. Awareness is a responsibility of being a professional. Others depend on it. Pick the right method. If you pick the wrong method, the information you provide is useless, and in worst case, it could be disastrous. Probabilities enable pragmatism. Developing software requires us to take a pragmatic approach to deliver results. And lastly, why? Why are we doing this? It's our job to be curious, to understand the purpose, the context, and the constraints in order to do a good estimate. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your time. I'm Amanda. Please let me know if you have any questions later.